She doesn't love the man who gives her the most. She respects the man whose giving reshapes her behavior. You thought providing would make you powerful, that by being consistent, generous, emotionally available, and financially supportive, you'd become irreplaceable. But you were wrong, because the provider is not the king. He is the servant who doesn't know he's kneeling. You don't gain control by giving. You gain control by withholding, strategically, visibly, and with consequence. She doesn't follow your provision. She studies its structure. She evaluates whether your generosity is a display of power or a disguise for powerlessness. This is the fatal confusion of modern men, believing that financial comfort equals psychological dominance. That because you paid the rent, bought the flights, covered the dinners, her loyalty is now secured. But comfort is not control. Affection is not allegiance. And when you give without hierarchy, without edge, without strategic delay, you become pleasant. And pleasant men are not followed. They are tolerated until someone colder enters the room. Someone who gives less but makes every act of provision a signal, a recalibration, a pause in her rebellion, a reminder of his frame. Understand, in her mind, money isn't just currency. It's a symbol. It tells her how you view yourself, whether you treat your resources as leverage or as bait, whether your spending teaches her limits or teaches her you have none. You thought your generosity made you stand out, but she's seen it before, 1,000 times, and every time the man behind it believed he was building connection. But what he was really building was invisibility. Because the more you give without principle, the more she sees you as emotionally dependent on her response. And dependence, no matter how generous, is always disrespected. Let's be clear, money is not evil. Money is not manipulative. Money is neutral until you use it. And how you use it defines whether you are a man of structure or a man of sacrifice. If your provision does not create new standards, new patterns, new behavior, it is not leadership, it is emotional bribery, and she may not reject it at first. She may smile, she may thank you, she may stay. But over time, she will sense the imbalance. She will feel that you give more than you demand, that your value is on display, not under control. And she will begin to pull away, not out of greed, but out of instinct. Because no woman stays in orbit around a man who has no gravity. You were not too generous. You were too available, too forgiving, too consistent in a world that respects scarcity, control, and well-timed power. You were the man who showed up, but never made your presence felt. You gave, without ever making it cost her to receive, and that's why you were forgotten. That's why your name stopped moving her. Not because you lacked value, but because you never made her feel what it would cost to lose it. You think she sees your generosity as love. That every dinner you pay for, every trip you fund, every solution you offer makes her feel more secure, more connected, more impressed. But that's your illusion. Because a woman doesn't just receive your spending, she studies it. She listens to what it says about how you move, what you fear, and whether your power is real or performative. She doesn't ask for money to measure your wallet. She observes your timing, your posture, your silence after the act to measure your structure, and most of the time you reveal far more than you intend to. Because when you give without control, you do not look generous. You look dependent, desperate for approval, eager to please, attempting to buy admiration without enforcing any rules. Women understand what most men never do, that money is not neutral. It's emotional data. It tells her if you fear her leaving. It tells her whether you're leading with confidence or covering insecurity with credit card balance. When you spend too quickly, she sees a man trying to close the gap through provision. When you spend without demand, she sees a man who has no standards, only hope. And when you spend repeatedly without change in her behavior, she sees a man who doesn't understand cause and effect. That's when her respect dies. Not because you don't give enough, but because you don't use it to shape anything real. She may still take what you offer. She may still smile and praise your effort. But every transaction without frame becomes a silent reminder. You give more than she earns. And women do not stay loyal to what comes too easily. Not because they're cruel, but because ease communicates disposability. If you're always there, always willing, always opening your world without making her qualify for it, you become a background benefit. Something expected, not something preserved. Now ask yourself this: when you give, What happens? Does her tone shift? Does her posture recalibrate? Do her tests stop? Or does she receive and continue as before? If it's the latter, your spending is weightless. No consequence, no edge, no dominance. And that is the most dangerous financial position to be in. A man who gives without creating psychological tension. Because that man will be admired publicly and disrespected privately. This is the part no one will say to you. She does not measure your worth by the gift. She measures it by how much of yourself you give away in the process. And if she senses that your identity is tied to her appreciation, if she sees that your power exists only when she's happy with you, then no matter how expensive the gift, it weakens you. A man of power spends with detachment. He gives without chasing. He creates reward, not ritual. And if she wants more, she must rise to it. Because what she's watching is not your generosity, she's watching the standard behind it. And if she sees none, she won't say anything. But she will begin to separate, not in word, but in instinct. Her desire will lower, her compliance will fade, and your name, once associated with provision, will become associated with softness. She sees everything, every dollar, every gesture, every silence after you give. And she remembers only one thing, whether it changed her or whether it exposed you. High-value men don't pay to impress, they pay to structure. Because the moment you spend to be liked, you have already failed. You've told her without words that her perception of you is more important than your perception of yourself. You've signaled that your value is negotiable, that your wallet is your voice, that you will trade resources for attention. And once you've made that trade, once she sees you giving as a strategy for approval, you are no longer the architect of the dynamic, you are the applicant. No amount of luxury can disguise this imbalance. You may have the car, the penthouse, the table. But if your spending is a performance, not a frame, she will take the benefits while slowly exiting the bond. Impression is short-term. Structure is permanent. If your financial moves don't create alignment, if they don't calibrate her behavior, you are not leading. You are lobbying. And lobbying never earns respect. It earns politeness, gratitude, occasional affection, but never obedience, never reverence. Because obedience doesn't come from what you offer. It comes from what your presence organizes. And unless your generosity is embedded inside a system of standards, silence, and consequence, it will always read as a plea. Consider the kings and merchants I have observed, men who held court not with emotion but with ritual. Their giving was always conditional, structured. It meant something. A seat at their table had to be earned. A gift from their hand implied a rule. And any failure to rise to the expectation that followed meant the gift was revoked. Or worse, never offered again. And women? They understood this deeply. They didn't see money as magic. They saw it as direction, a signal of dominance wrapped in elegance, and that is why they submitted. Not because they were impressed, but because they were instructed. You are not her savior, you are her system, and systems are not loved for their generosity. They are loved for their predictability, their architecture, their rules. So stop paying to be liked. Stop giving to be thanked. Start funding only what reinforces your frame. Start giving only when it deepens your rhythm, when it punishes disrespect through absence, when it rewards femininity through rare access. Spend like a sovereign, not a suitor. Because the high-value man does not seek applause when he gives. He expects adjustment. He expects recalibration. He expects submission not because he demands it, but because his spending has structure. And structure, when backed by silence, always feels heavier than charm. Money doesn't just increase options. It restructures the dynamic between man and woman. Silently, completely, and often irreversibly, but only when it's wielded with precision. Most men acquire money and think it will earn them affection. But affection is not the measure, power is. And money that doesn't adjust her behavior isn't power, it's noise. It creates comfort, yes, but it does not create submission. Because submission is not a response to generosity. It is a response to gravity, to boundary, to command. And when money is offered without these elements, it produces ease, not hierarchy. When a man has no money, he must lead with charm, attentiveness, humor, softness. He overperforms emotionally to compensate materially. But the moment he acquires wealth, something dangerous happens. He believes the dynamic has shifted, that his presence now carries weight, that his resources now ensure her loyalty. And so he begins to give more, to do more. But still she tests. Still she pulls away. Still she treats his power as invisible. Why? Because wealth without structure does not alter the frame. It enhances what's already there. And if what's already there is softness, uncertainty, inconsistency, money only magnifies the imbalance. The high-value man knows this. He does not throw money at her emotions. He does not spend to soothe. He spends to shape, to rewire her instincts, to re-anchor her perception. Every transaction is a signal. Every reward is a mirror. He uses money not to flatter her, but to program her. Because he understands that the woman does not follow comfort, she follows consequence. And if there is no edge behind your giving, no cost for misalignment, no pause between disrespect and reaction, she may accept the gift, but she will never accept the frame. This is where most men collapse. They believe that money will automatically buy them the masculine role, but the feminine does not yield to wealth, it yields to control. Not control in the crude sense, but control in the Machiavellian sense, the ability to direct rhythm, to set terms, to walk away without warning. She respects the man who makes her feel unsafe in her control, not unsafe emotionally, but hierarchically. And money, when paired with that energy, becomes authority, not support, authority. And authority, when felt, dissolves her resistance without debate. Ask yourself, does your money bring her closer, or just calm her? Does she submit to your presence, or simply enjoy your provision? Because there is a difference between being appreciated and being obeyed. One soothes the ego, the other rearranges her behavior. And if your spending is not tied to recalibration, you are not leading. You are decorating. And she will enjoy it until she no longer does, until she begins to test again, to dominate again, to lead again. And you, still generous, still consistent, will wonder why it's happening. But now you know, because money alone is not the power. It is the amplifier of your power or your weakness. And only one of those makes her feel truly safe. You think your money should make her feel something, safer, happier, more attached. But emotion is a fire, and when you pour resources into it, you don't gain power. You feed volatility. Because the more you spend trying to shape her mood, the more you teach her that her emotions dictate your actions. You stop becoming the architect of the dynamic and start becoming the sponsor of her instability. And the man who funds emotion instead of structure will always be overthrown by the one who builds silently and makes her conform to frame. Understand this. High-value men do not fund emotion. They fund position. They don't throw money at tension hoping to dissolve it. They allow the tension to remain and use their money to define what access, comfort, or reward looks like when alignment returns. They don't pay to repair connection. They pay to anchor hierarchy. They give in moments of order, not chaos. And when things become uncertain, they don't offer gifts. They offer space. Because they understand that spending during emotional turbulence communicates one thing: negotiation. And the feminine doesn't trust a negotiator. She trusts a ruler. You think that paying after an argument shows care, that offering comfort after disrespect shows maturity. But it doesn't. It teaches her that your boundaries are for sale, that all she needs to do is escalate and your resources will come chasing after peace. This creates an unspoken contract. Her emotion moves you more than your own law. And that's when respect evaporates. Not because you were weak, but because your timing was. Funding position means you use your money to shape the map she moves through. You spend when she's in alignment, not when she's in rebellion. You reward pattern, not apology. You create association, order equals access. Submission equals ease. Compliance equals comfort. Everything else equals delay. Ambiguity, silence. You are not punishing. You are training. Not in a cruel way, but in a calibrated way. Because she wants to feel your center, and if you collapse every time she spirals, your wealth becomes a pillow, not a pillar. You must understand the highest form of masculine provision is not reactive. It's ritualistic. It doesn't chase problems, it builds systems. Systems where your giving is predictable but not accessible, where it flows when she's feminine, quiet, soft, in sync, and stops when she tests. She will feel this, even if she never admits it, and it will change how she sees you. Not as generous, but as sovereign. Not as sweet, but as structured. Never fund emotion, never fund tears, never fund tantrums. Wait, watch, withhold. Then when the rhythm returns, give with calm, with precision, with silence, and let her feel what the absence of that giving cost her. That's how you use money, not to fix feelings, but to cement position. Because position, once defined, does what no emotion ever can. It creates peace without performance. You gave her the most, and she listened the least. You paid for her comfort, her peace, her space, her life, and still she questioned your authority. She negotiated your presence. She tested your tone. Meanwhile, another man gave her nothing. No gifts, no reassurance, no softness, and yet she followed him. She waited for his reply. She respected his rhythm. Why? Because women do not follow the man who gives the most. They follow the man whose giving must be earned. The one whose silence weighs more than your attention. The one whose indifference triggers introspection while your kindness breeds contempt. This is the paradox most men never accept. That effort is not the metric. That provision without resistance becomes background noise. That the more you give without control, the more you convince her you are negotiating, not leading. And the feminine does not negotiate with the masculine. It aligns with it or abandons it. And if she senses that your giving is motivated by fear, by anxiety, by desperation to hold her, she may smile, but she will not submit. Because submission only happens in the presence of a man who gives with boundaries, not with hope. The man who gives least, if he gives with precision, if he gives with gravity, creates more obedience than the one who floods her with comfort. Because scarcity makes the gift meaningful. She feels it. She slows down. She calibrates her tone. She considers her actions. And not because he demanded it, but because the environment around him is too weighted to treat lightly. That's the key. She doesn't adjust because he gives more. She adjusts because she can feel what it would cost to lose access. This is where high-value men separate from generous men. High-value men understand the economy of tension. They know that the less they give, the more it must mean. They use absence as pressure. They use silence as memory. They let the woman sit with herself until she realizes that chaos earns her nothing, that rebellion produces distance, and that the reward only returns when her behavior returns to the rhythm. You gave because you thought it would increase her gratitude. But gratitude without tension never matures into loyalty. She may thank you, but she will not protect the bond. Because the bond cost her nothing, and what costs nothing is always treated like it can be replaced. So stop chasing gratitude. Stop thinking more effort will correct disrespect. It won't. The man who gives less but demands more through his energy, through his absence, through his silence, he is the one she listens to. Not because he's cruel, but because he's calibrated, because his value doesn't scream, it waits. And that waiting is what reshapes her, not your words, not your gifts, but the void you leave when your giving is withdrawn. That's the lesson. Less provision, more posture. Less comfort, more consequence. That's the man she recalibrates around. That's the man who rules the room, even when he says nothing. Desire doesn't rise from comfort, it rises from calibration. You were taught to give more to make her want you, to increase attention when she grows cold, to offer reassurance when she pulls back. But high-value men do not chase desire. They train it, and they train it by making every act of provision a mirror, reflecting not their affection but her alignment. You do not give because she asks. You do not offer because she's upset. You give because the moment is earned. The tone is right, the structure is intact, and when it is not, you withhold, not in punishment, in policy. You must understand that women respond to rhythm, not logic, rhythm. And when your giving follows her emotion, you reverse polarity. You become the responder, the adjuster, the echo. And the masculine is never respected in the role of the echo. It is meant to be the drum, the beat to which she softens, the presence to which she orients. And your provision, when tied to that rhythm, becomes a form of guidance, a silent map, a clear signal. This behavior brings reward. This behavior brings absence. When you give too much too often with no behavioral feedback, you overload the circuit. She cannot feel the reward anymore. You think you're showing love, but what she feels is saturation. No edge, no cost, no consequence. And desire dies not from cruelty, but from predictability. The man who gives with no break trains her to see him as stable, yes, but also as non-negotiable, not in strength, in softness. He becomes the baseline, and the baseline is never desired, it's expected. The high-value man gives like a ritual. He makes provision a response to harmony, not to hysteria. She learns over time that what he offers is tied to her state, her behavior, her language, her submission. And when she falls out of rhythm, when she disrespects, when she tests, when she challenges, he doesn't fight, he doesn't chase, he pauses, he goes quiet. He lets the structure reassert itself in the silence. And when she returns, when she softens, when she yields, when she corrects, then the reward reappears. And it's not just a gift, it's a recognition, a ceremony, a recalibration of her place in his world. This isn't manipulation, it's leadership, it's architecture, it's the masculine principle asserting itself through timing and control. And she may resist it at first. But what she resists consciously, she follows instinctively. Because women do not crave generosity. They crave gravity, and gravity cannot be begged for. It must be felt, with weight, with stillness, with strategic provision that always reflects where she stands in the orbit. So make every act of provision mean something. Do not give to fix her feelings. Give to reinforce your frame. And when she deviates from it, don't explain. Just remove. Let her feel the void. Let her remember the warmth. And let her realize on her own that only order brings it back. That's how you train desire, not with gifts, with consequence. She will never say the words out loud. She will never ask, "Do you have structure behind your generosity?" She won't phrase it that cleanly. But she will test, quietly, repeatedly. Because the more you give without being asked, the more she needs to know. Can you stop? Can you withhold? Can you say no without raising your voice? Can you disappear without explaining yourself? Because if the answer is no, if your giving is compulsive, reactive, apologetic, then she does not see a man. She sees a benefactor in disguise. And benefactors are respected for what they offer, not for who they are. When you overgive, you send a signal. Your identity depends on her acceptance, that you are preemptively negotiating for space in her world. And the feminine, especially in women who have seen power, touched power, lost power, smells this need like blood in the water. She may not even know she's doing it, but she will test. She will begin small, an eye roll, a tone shift, a cold comment disguised as a joke. She wants to see if your warmth still flows when you're disrespected, if your money still moves when your respect is challenged, and if it does, if you keep giving, if you keep apologizing. She learns instantly. Your generosity is not backed by spine, it is backed by fear. And once that fear is detected, her desire begins to atrophy. Because no woman stays in submission to a man she can move with emotion alone. She may say thank you. She may compliment your kindness. But behind the performance, she begins recalibrating. She starts holding back softness. She withholds curiosity. She stops deferring to your words. Because the tests she's running are giving her all the answers. That your giving is emotional, not architectural. That it flows too freely. That it is not a reflection of structure, but an attempt to buy proximity. The high-value man doesn't flinch when tested. He doesn't get emotional. He doesn't explain. He pauses. He lets her see that disrespect, even in tone, even in posture, has a cost, and not a cost in anger, but in distance, in silence, in revoked access. He teaches without scolding. He withholds without announcement. He vanishes without drama. Because he understands what she's really asking with every test is this: are you the structure or the sacrifice? When you overgive, you teach her to escalate. When you give with rhythm, you teach her to align. And the difference is everything. One creates resentment, the other creates reverence. And she may not be able to explain why she begins behaving better around one man and worse around another. But I can. The former gave too much without edge. The latter gave with weight. So stop giving because you feel guilty. Stop spending because you're afraid to lose her. Start observing, start measuring, let her test, and let her feel what it costs. Not with punishment, with precision. That's how respect is forged, not in what you give, but in what you are willing to withhold when it matters most. You cannot reward her before you've built the frame. Because reward without structure is not power, it's noise. It's warmth with no walls. And she may enjoy it in the moment, but it will not hold her. Because nothing in her behavior has changed, nothing in her instincts has been shaped. The dynamic remains emotional, improvisational, soft. And softness in the absence of structure always collapses. She'll smile when you give, but that smile means nothing unless it sits inside a system you designed. A high-value man doesn't give because the moment is sweet. He gives because the moment is earned. And earning implies rules, a standard, a pattern, a behavior that aligns with his world. That means the giving always comes second, never first. First comes frame, clarity of leadership, rhythm of interaction, tone of voice, the unspoken gravity that tells her where the limits are. Only when that frame is clear does the reward arrive. And when it does, it lands not as a bribe, but as a crown. You must understand that the feminine does not crave generosity. It craves orientation. Direction A, clear mirror. And that mirror is built through frame, when you stop explaining, when you stop apologizing, when your presence demands calibration instead of questions. And only then, only once the hierarchy is intact, do you offer your resources. Not as peace offerings, but as markers of progress, as affirmations that her behavior, her energy, her presence is now synchronized with your leadership. Most men reverse this. They give too early. They fund without context. They provide before she's earned their time. And when she resists, when she questions, when she misbehaves, they keep giving. They double down, hoping their consistency will make her see their value, but she doesn't see value. She sees disorganization. She sees desperation. She sees the absence of law. And no woman respects a kingdom without a legal system. So build the law first. Build the structure first. Make her learn your silences. Make her feel your absences. Make her sense what it costs to disobey, not through threats, but through removal, through ambiguity. And when she returns, when her tone adjusts, when her voice softens, when her posture changes, then you give. And that giving becomes holy. It lands like thunder. Because now it means something. It was not offered. It was earned. You are not there to soothe. You are there to lead. And leadership does not offer gifts before compliance. It offers clarity first and generosity as reward. She will test it. She will challenge it. But if the frame is real, she will adapt. She will soften. She will submit. And the man who gives after that alignment becomes irreplaceable. Remember this rule. If you attach reward to emotion, she will rise and fall forever. But if you attach reward to frame, she will restructure herself around your law. And that is not just loyalty. That is order. She doesn't submit because she knows everything about you. She submits because she doesn't. Because the edges of your life are undefined. Because your resources feel controlled, concealed, calculated. The man who speaks openly about what he earns, what he owns, what he plans to buy, he removes the tension. He kills the mystique. He floods the dynamic with clarity that feels comforting but kills hierarchy. Because once she understands your finances, once she can measure them, once she can predict them, she stops respecting their weight, and she starts testing how much of it she can move. You think transparency creates trust, but in male-female dynamics, transparency creates familiarity, and familiarity dissolves polarity. It makes her feel like she understands the structure, and what is fully understood is rarely revered. The most dangerous thing you can do as a man of means is to behave like a man who must justify his wealth. She doesn't need to know how much you have. She needs to feel that what you have is under your control, that you're not driven by indulgence but by discipline, that your spending isn't reactive, it's ritualistic, that your money isn't an open stream, it's a gated current. And only she can find the rhythm that opens it. Mystery creates imagination, and imagination creates restraint. When she doesn't know your limit, your net worth, your margins, she doesn't know how far she can push. And so she hesitates, she slows, she studies, she becomes more deliberate with her tone, more conscious of her posture. Not because she's manipulating you, but because mystery forces adaptation. It forces awareness. It makes her question herself before she tests you. And that pause, that single second of uncertainty, is where submission begins. Look at every man she respects. You will notice something consistent. She cannot predict him. She cannot read him. She may know his values, his vibe, his energy, but she does not fully understand his structure, especially not his finances. And it drives her deeper into alignment, not because he's richer, but because he's unreadable. And unreadable men create tension. And tension, when tied to resources, creates devotion. This doesn't mean you hide your competence. It means you hide your playbook. You show her the result, not the system. You let her feel the power, not trace the wires. The more she knows, the more she controls. The more she controls, the more you follow, and the moment you follow, the masculine dies. Let her guess. Let her wonder. Let her fantasize. When she asks, smile. When she presses, pause. When she demands clarity, offer silence. She doesn't want a breakdown of your portfolio. She wants to feel your control. And control, when wrapped in mystery, becomes myth. And myth, more than money, is what women submit to. Your generosity does not create power unless it can be reversed. If she believes your gifts are permanent, no matter how she behaves, then your provision becomes background noise. It becomes furniture. It loses all leverage. You think she'll appreciate consistency. But consistency without cost is not respected. It's consumed. The highest value men give with grace, but beneath that grace is quiet enforcement. What is given can be revoked. A woman feels safe when she feels standards. She feels alive when she feels polarity, but she feels respect when she feels risk. Risk that what she enjoys is tied to how she shows up. Risk that the lifestyle, the access, the elevation isn't just some ambient reward, but a conditional reflection of alignment. That's when the gifts become gravity. That's when your provision creates more than pleasure. It creates structure. Because now it's not just nice, it's earned. And what's earned is always protected more than what's offered. You must understand, giving is not weakness, giving is not submission, but giving without revocability is. That's what separates the sovereign from the simp. The sovereign gives when he sees synchronization. The simp gives hoping it will create it, and when it doesn't, he gives more and more, until the woman no longer sees the act of giving. She sees a man trying to buy back what he never demanded in the first place: obedience. So you must make this law real in your frame. Every act of generosity must be a mirror, and if the reflection changes, the reward disappears. No announcements, no threats, no conversations, just silence, just absence. She misses the warmth, she feels the gap, and her instincts tell her, I've moved wrong. Because now, for the first time, your giving isn't just kind, it's calibrated, strategic, masculine, scarce. This isn't about punishment, it's about clarity. A woman doesn't resent a man who stops giving when disrespected. She respects him because it tells her he's not performing, he's governing. That his wealth is an extension of his law, not his longing. And if she returns, if she adjusts, if she recovers her posture, your giving resumes not as an apology but as a ceremony, a signal that she is back inside the architecture. Every man who loses a woman he gave the world to made this mistake. He gave like it was permanent, like nothing could break the flow, like being generous was enough. But generosity is not a virtue unless it teaches, unless it adjusts, unless it frames your power. So give, but with withdrawal written into your energy. Let her feel that nothing in your kingdom is unconditional except your discipline. That's what keeps her attentive. That's what keeps her soft. That's what keeps her watching your mood like it's weather. Because she knows now that what you give can vanish like the sun. And that vanishing, more than any gift, is what makes her stay. The richest men don't chase. Not because they're emotionless, but because they understand the first law of dominance. The more you pursue, the more you disqualify yourself. They know their value is not in movement, but in mass. Not in how fast they react, but in how deeply they anchor. Their wealth doesn't serve their anxiety. It enforces their stillness. And in that stillness, women adjust. They calibrate, they recenter themselves, because a man who doesn't chase becomes a gravitational field. He doesn't pursue devotion. He creates the conditions where it becomes inevitable. This is what most men never learn. That effort alone does not create attraction. In fact, excess effort repels. especially when it's not connected to position, especially when it's emotional. She doesn't want your gifts if they come with over-explanation. She doesn't want your time if it feels like performance. She doesn't want your presence if it arrives like a question. The man who gives quietly, rarely, unpredictably, and only when the dynamic is right, becomes sacred. Not because he's aloof, but because every act is deliberate. Devotion doesn't rise from being impressed, it rises from being organized. From a woman entering a system she didn't build, but feels safer inside than outside. That system is not verbal, it's energetic, it's spatial. It's how you look at her when she tests. It's how you go silent when she's emotional. It's how you withhold warmth until her posture changes. And when she changes, you reward with calm, with presence, with touch. But only then. The richest men understand this because they've had everything else fail. They gave too much, too soon, too easily. They funded lifestyles that outgrew their frame. They chased women with status, with vacations, with status displays, and still lost them to men with less money but more rules. Until they learned, it's not the size of the empire, it's the stability of the throne. You don't need to flaunt your worth. You need to become still in it. Your silence is more powerful than a monologue. Your distance, when well-timed, is more commanding than any apology. She doesn't want to hear how much you care. She wants to feel how carefully you give. And when she feels that, when she realizes that she cannot manipulate your generosity, that she must earn it, she orients around you. This is how devotion is created, not by chasing, by building an ecosystem that rewards alignment and ignores everything else, not with cruelty, with calibration. You give her a map, a climate, a gravitational law, and you let her decide if she wants to live inside it. If she does, you provide. If she doesn't, you disappear. No speeches, no chasing, just motionless consequence. Because the richest man is not the one who offers the most. It's the one whose stillness costs the most to lose. The moment you explain why you gave, why you spent, why you provided, you lower the value of the gesture. You make the act about your approval-seeking instead of your authority. And a woman does not submit to generosity she can predict. She submits to generosity she cannot fully read. The high-value man gives in silence. He offers without narration. Because he knows the real power of provision isn't in the gift. It's in the space left around it, in the ambiguity, in the question it plants. What did I do to deserve this? What does this mean? Will it happen again? Explanations destroy mystery, and mystery is what gives your spending its gravitational pull. When you hand her something and follow it with words, you strip it of its power. You tell her what to think. You try to guide her reaction. And that alone signals to her subconscious that you doubt your own authority. Because a man who truly leads doesn't need to explain his movements. He lets others interpret. He lets their curiosity do the work. And in that uncertainty, tension grows. And where there's tension, there's respect. You think explaining builds intimacy, but what it really builds is emotional debt. She feels that now she must perform gratitude. Now she must mirror your effort. Now she's inside a transaction, not a kingdom. And women do not fall in love with contracts. They fall in love with presence that frames their behavior without overt negotiation. The man who spends and then just observes, he gains power. Because his action implies something deeper. It hints at a system, a rhythm, a standard. And the woman, if she's feminine, will lean into that frame. She will start modifying herself not because he told her to, but because she feels the value of what she's receiving and doesn't want to risk the silence that might follow rebellion. Never explain why you spent. Never break the spell. Let her assign meaning. Let her project stories. Let her create the narrative in her own mind. You gave because you decided to. Not because she earned it, not because she asked, not because you're trying to buy emotion, because it was your move. And moves that aren't explained can't be negotiated. That's the lesson. You don't need her to understand. You need her to feel the boundary, to sense the structure, to recognize that when you give, it's not an opening. It's a signal, a symbol, a reminder that there is a deeper game being played, and only those who obey the tempo get to stay inside the song. So let your spending speak without sound, because when the king speaks less, the court listens more. You gave her everything. Support, consistency, security. You paid the rent, covered the dinners, structured her peace. And you thought that meant she was yours, that your provision had earned permanence. But here's the Machiavellian truth. You can fund her life and still have no authority in it. Because money does not bind her to you. Behavior does. And if your spending isn't shaping her behavior, it's just a feature of her lifestyle, not a reflection of your leadership. Provision does not guarantee possession. A woman doesn't stay because you gave. She stays because your giving was connected to her alignment. Because your silence had teeth. Because your generosity had a rhythm. And she didn't want to fall out of it. The moment she senses that your spending will continue regardless of how she shows up, she severs the connection between respect and reward. And once that link is broken, she may still live under your roof, but her loyalty is gone. Her mind detaches, her body follows later. Most men believe that funding equals bonding, that financial security builds emotional intimacy. But security without consequence breeds complacency. And complacency in women does not look like comfort. It looks like quiet contempt. She begins to feel above the man she once admired, not because he stopped giving, but because he gave without updating the terms, without checking her tone, without correcting her disrespect, without reinforcing the structure that once made her feel safe. The woman you fund is not yours unless she feels your law, not your love, your law. And law is not delivered through lectures. It is delivered through absence, through revoked access, through calibrated generosity that mirrors her behavior, not her emotions. She must feel your wealth as a reflection of her place in the structure, not a reward for simply existing in proximity to you. This is why high-value men rarely lose control. Because they don't confuse access with ownership. They never assume she's theirs just because they're paying. Instead, they observe, they withdraw, they recalibrate. They watch her adapt, and only when she aligns again, only when she softens, quiets, returns to rhythm do they resume giving. Not as proof of love, but as enforcement of law. You can give her the world, but if she doesn't feel that world is held up by your spine, she will walk through it like a tourist. She'll enjoy it. She'll take photos. But she won't build there. And eventually she'll leave. Not because she lacked comfort, but because she never felt ruled. So understand this. You don't own what you fund. You only own what obeys your silence. And if your provision cannot enforce rhythm, it will be consumed, then discarded. Just like every man who believed his generosity was enough. She doesn't stay because she loves you. She stays because leaving would cost her more than staying. Not emotionally, structurally. This is the truth no romantic will ever tell you, that loyalty is not secured by sentiment. It's secured by infrastructure, by the weight of your frame, by the systems you control, by the doors you can close without raising your voice. A high-value man does not build a bond by being sweet. He builds a bond by becoming dangerous to walk away from. When she knows you fund her peace, shape her rhythm, define the rules of access, she doesn't just admire you. She calculates around you. She sees your presence not as optional, but as foundational. And in that understanding, her behavior changes. Her tone adjusts. Her defiance dulls. Not because she's scared of you, but because she knows your absence would fracture her comfort. Men who get left are men whose exit costs nothing. They gave emotionally, not tactically. They were generous, but not strategic. They were kind, but not consequential. And so the woman left not out of cruelty, but out of freedom. Because nothing was holding her, nothing was structured to apply pressure. She had no skin in the system. She could walk, and did. But when a woman stays, truly stays, it's because you've made her adapt her life to your law, not through control, through architecture, through calibrated giving, through a presence that rearranges her priorities, a silence that creates reflection, a provision that rewards submission, not survival. Understand, this is not about manipulation. This is about mastery. The man who builds his world around her will always be the weaker party. The man who builds his world, with or without her, and lets her enter on terms, he becomes the center of gravity. He is not chased. He is moved toward, because he doesn't convince her to stay. He creates an ecosystem she doesn't want to leave. And if she ever does, if she tests the gate, he doesn't beg. He doesn't argue. He lets her feel the cost. He closes the provision. He withdraws the warmth. And suddenly the silence is louder than the conversation she left him for. Suddenly the void is heavier than the drama. Suddenly she remembers, this wasn't just a relationship, this was a system. And she left stability for noise. That's the key. She doesn't stay because you ask her to. She stays because leaving means losing more than she can afford. And that's not fear, that's structure, that's consequence. That's how kings are obeyed, by building castles that no one wants to walk out of. If you forget everything else I've said, remember this. Stop paying for comfort. Start paying for obedience. Because comfort is disposable. It fades, it spoils. It makes you pleasant, forgettable, soft. But obedience? That is structural. That is unforgettable. That is what makes your name linger in her mind long after your presence leaves the room. You were taught to use money to create ease, but the high-value man uses money to create weight, to apply pressure, to structure silence, to punish disrespect without words, to make her behavior shift before she even understands why. The man who pays for comfort is replaced when the emotions change. The man who pays for obedience is feared when the emotions change, because she knows. His giving is not a reaction. It is a law. And if she violates the law, she doesn't just lose the man, she loses the system, the rhythm, the protection, the certainty. And in a world that burns through men like kindling, certainty is the only thing that creates legacy. Do not be sweet. Be necessary. Do not be adored. Be unavoidable. You must build a world she orbits, not because you hold her hand, but because your gravity makes her legs shake when she thinks about leaving. You do not offer the gift unless it's mirrored in tone. You do not provide the peace unless it's protected by behavior. And you never, never let her see your giving as her right. Because once she does, she will forget that it ever cost her something. This is the final principle. Not cruelty, but consequence. Not bitterness, but discipline. You pay to build the throne, not to decorate the court. You fund in silence. You enforce with absence. You reward with calculation. And you do it all without flinching, without explanation, without needing her to understand. Because your power is not in how much you give. It is in how much she fears losing it. So stop paying to be liked. Pay to be obeyed. Stop giving for closeness. Give for structure. And stop asking, does she love me? Start asking, does my presence reorder her world? Because if it doesn't, you're not ruling. You're renting. You are not a bank. You are a kingdom. Build accordingly. Comment, I no longer fund softness, I fund structure, if you understand now that provision without power is poverty. And subscribe, not for comfort, but for clarity. This isn't about money. This is about Machiavellian mastery. And it begins when you stop asking how to feel and start deciding how to rule.